Hey Bamfam, welcome back to my channel. It's your host, Kara, aka Lady McBamf, and today I'm going to host my monthly wrap-up. Without further ado, let's get into it. I targeted myself to read 5 books this month. However, I had a lot more time than I assumed, so I read 6 and then started a couple other ones that I'll touch on at the end of the video. So the very first one that I want to jump into, and I mentioned it in the last video that I have already read this one before, but so this will be a reread for me, and that is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I decided to reread this book because it's been a couple years since I've read it, and I remember vividly loving the prose and thinking that Nabokov's writing style was absolutely A+. However, something interesting that I noticed the second time reading it is the subject matter. So a lot of people don't like this book because it does follow a man named Humbert who is in love with a 14-year-old girl who he calls a nymphette named Lolita. Just by the nature of the novel itself, it's very taboo. I don't really mind the taboo nature, even though it's very graphic and in your face a lot of the times, because I'm more focused on the prose. So if you guys are more focused on prose and the kind of queasy subject matter doesn't really bother you, then I highly recommend reading Lolita. If you're not interested in reading about a pedophile, I don't recommend reading it. It's fair. That's a fair point. So it's definitely, this time around, I read a little bit with my sister and she was a bit put off by the subject matter and she couldn't really get into the novel, which I had never really thought about before. So I don't know. Every time I read this book, I always discover new ways I feel about it, which I attribute to really good writing, because when you have a subject matter that is so controversial as pedophilia, and then you have someone like me who really enjoys the book, it's kind of a toss-up of to why. And I feel like the reason why is because I don't read this book so much for the subject matter, I read it for the prose. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 because, like I said, I think that the writing style is definitely worth the read, and I think also the layers inside of the novel, and what I mean by layers is you'll read it the first time and you'll just see the story for the story, and then the second time you read it you'll see all the undertones of motifs that the author plants throughout the story, and you'll find a lot of foreshadowing and you'll find a lot of wordplay, and you'll just see a lot more literary elements that lie underneath the basic story and the basic premise, which is why rereading it is always a good idea, which is why I love this book. So, first one, Lolita. The second one, I don't have a copy with me, so I'll just post a picture of it here because I listened to it on Audible, but it is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Again, another reread, and again, another literary fiction. It's Donna Tartt's debut novel, and I've already read this one when I was in university, and I decided to reread this one again recently because, just like Lolita, I really appreciate books that have really good sentence structures. Kind of the concept of, if you pick any sentence out of the novel, the sentence in itself is a masterpiece. I really value that in a book. So basically it follows a boy named Richard who usurps himself from his hometown to New Hampshire to go to school in Hampton. And he joins the Greek class, which only has 5 students and is very, very elite. And amongst this group, there's a murder, and you basically get into the heads of the main characters and the characters surrounding him and why the murder has taken place. The book is basically the build up to the murder and the aftermath of the murder. First and foremost, it's a character study, but also it has a lot to do with like coming of age themes. It has a lot to do with right and wrong morale, which is actually mirrored in the Greek that the character studies in the novel. It's just one of those books, again, where I don't recommend reading it if you want something kind of light and frothy, but if you are looking for something to chew on, I do recommend reading A Secret History. And it's actually narrated by Donna Tartt herself. I recommend reading it. Donna Tartt reads it, end of story. I gave that book a 5 out of 5 as well. So the next 2 books I want to talk about, I'm talking about them together because they are by the same author. So the next 2 books that I want to talk about are Jellicoe Road by Melina Marchetta and also Finnegan of the Rock by Melina Marchetta. Both are rereads for me. I absolutely love Melina's writing style. She has a really good way of getting into the characters' heads. I don't want to try to describe the story to you because it is kind of complex and I always blubber when I try to tell people what it's about, but just trust me, it's pretty good. Read the blurb online if you're interested. But yeah, I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5. And then the next one by Melina Marchetta that I reread is Finnegan of the Rock. This one is my favorite out of her 2 novels that I read, not because Jellicoe Road is very good, obviously it's good, it won the Prince Prize, but Finnegan of the Rock is more my style when it comes to like genres. I preferably really like fantasy, I really like anything to do with period pieces, medieval, things like that. And so this whole story takes place in a world that doesn't exist. It has a map in the beginning. If a book has a map in the beginning, I am sold. I want to read that book. I need to reference that map every time they reference a place, and that is exactly what Melina does in this novel. So whereas Jellicoe Road was a little bit more about the character studies and mystery, this novel is about reclaiming a kingdom and having kind of not superpowers, but there's a little bit of the supernatural in the novel that just touches on the mysticisms of fantasy, which I really enjoy. So I gave this a 5 out of 5, whereas I gave Jellicoe Road a 4.5 out of 5, only due to personal preference. I only have 2 books left to talk about. So the other one that I read this month was an Agatha Christie novel, Evil Under the Sun. This is my second Agatha Christie novel that I've read in my life. The first one being 10 Little Indians, or it's also called And Then There Were None. If you guys have read that one was excellent. So I had high hopes going into this one as well. I really liked it. The thing I really like about Agatha Christie's mystery writing style is that you think you can predict the ending, but you usually can't. I say this only having read 2 of her novels, but I have been completely wrong in my predictions on who's the murderer and how they murdered and all the details that the detective digs up. I can't actually link together. I don't know if that's just a me problem, but she does a really good job of pulling the wool over my eyes, let's just say that. I gave this book a 4 out of 5. The reason why I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 is, again, because it does not really fit into my normal style of books that I really like, but regardless, it's a really good book. So anyways, Stargirl is the last book that I read this month. I did have a little bit of extra free time to get around to reading it. I read it as a kid, really enjoyed it, and there's a movie coming out, so I thought, what the heck, I'll just read it again. It basically is a book about non-conforming. Follows a girl whose name is Stargirl, and she enters into a new school, and she's really weird, and our main character is fascinated with her. He thinks that she's really quirky and kind of off in a weird, off-putting way. He's not really sure what to think of her, and then he eventually falls in love with her, and shit hits the fan. Bullying, love, rejection. I read this, like I said, as a kid, and at the time I really liked it, but it wasn't until I got older that I kind of appreciated it more. I found that I identified a lot more with Stargirl now as an adult than I did as a kid, because I've had a lot of time to feel the confines of social normities, and this book kind of rebuts that. And it was really refreshing to read. It's a really good book. I highly recommend if you have it on your shelf, or if your kid has to read it for school, take it and read it because it's really good. So I gave that one a 5 out of 5. Wow. So that was my list of books that I've read this month. It was a pretty decent month, 6 books in all. I'm gonna try to have a good month in May as well, so stick around for my May to be read pile. That's coming out soon. But as I mentioned earlier, I am in the middle of reading 2 books right now. One is a book that's called Cross the Line. I don't have it with me, it's downstairs, but I'll put a link here. It's called Cross the Line, so I should finish that one soon. And then I'm also reading a very, 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 very long book by Brandon Sanderson called The Way of Kings, which is here. That's on my Audible. I'm about halfway done right now, and I'll mention this more in my next video. So anyways, if you guys have any opinions on the books that I read this month, leave them down in the comments. If you have any recommendations for books that you eventually want me to read in the next couple months, let me know. So anyways, thanks for watching. See you guys later. Bye!